Let's jump right in. Let's start with the obligatory chart of Moore's Law in reverse. Each drug approval is costing more and more money. Because of new approaches in small molecule and biologic design, the industry has invested heavily in the promises of data lakes. It's been over 5 years since that started. Costs continue. That can't all be laid at the feet of Hadoop, of course, but some of it can. Hadoop projects tend to have the flavor of let's dump our data into a big distributed file system and hope something comes out of it. That so-called undefined value proposition that the research firm Gartner has been talking about with regards to the approach most data lake, big data projects have taken for a while. We're at an 85% failure rate for these Hadoop projects. Meanwhile, 451, another research group, has been delving into the causes of those failures. Eroom's law looks like doom, yet the different types of so-called omics or systems, network, and other types of pharmacology and genetics, I realize I'm painting a broad brush and drastically oversimplifying it in order to get to the point quickly. There is a lot of hope that understanding a personal genome, simulating how a molecule binding works, and understanding and taking advantage of all of the other stuff something might bind to will have a brighter future in which cures, or at least improved treatments, are found and more personalized. Bringing this about will rely on data, but it will also rely on continued transformation and improvements in methodology, the so-called Pharma 2020, of which we have to transition to completely in 2 years to meet the arbitrary deadline. As one expert put it, let optimism rule. Except the pessimists actually rule by law. The current focus on orphan drugs and biologics that only target a small population is in part due to reaching various biological limits, but largely a result of a distortion created by the regulatory regime. Some of that is for purpose. If you've got a rare disease, you'll certainly appreciate that. Moreover, if you don't have a rare disease and you also don't want unsafe medications reaching the market. However, if we're going to create a more personalized form of medicine, we can't file a $1 million approval for each customized delivery. Collaborating with a physician on off-label use is verboten, so some of what has been suggested as the future is not really permitted under the current regime. We've talked about the data management side, but what about the analytics side? Not long ago, I was talking to a biotech researcher at Duke, and his frustration was that with all the tools out there, many researchers were still grabbing small data sets onto their desktop and munging them there. This is even more problematic at the development phase, where you may have clinical trials going on in other countries. There's a bit of an irony that simulating how a molecule binds to a gene may involve advanced technologies and techniques, but managing how that data gets there and communicating that data through the organization is often done by rather traditional approaches. Not only are clinical trials now more or less global, the FDA is increasingly insisting that they look at diverse populations. As we know, most molecules will do nothing useful, or do too many undesirable things. The sooner we know which ones, the better and the lower the costs. With the long cycle of bringing new products to market, we need everyone in the organization involved as soon as it possibly makes sense, and have data in a format that they understand. So let's look at an example of a component-based application that is tailored to purpose, but not built from scratch. John, our senior solutions engineer, will now take it away, showing you a demo of an App Studio application which visualizes data ingested from clinicaltrials.gov.
Thanks, Andy. During this demo, I will show you an exploration of clinical trial data based on around 250,000 publicly available trials indexed into Fusion's search engine. The approach I will demonstrate for gleaning value from this data does not rely on constructing complex queries for interrogating a data lake, but rather on the power of search and intuitive user experience. This application shares capabilities of both traditional dashboards and classic search interfaces, combining them to create a richer experience. I'll also highlight how we can incorporate other data sources such as Wikipedia or a compound database into one seamless experience. This dashboard offers a 40,000-foot view for the 250,000 trials. It gives us the information in aggregate and lots of avenues of exploration, such as therapeutic areas, companies involved, intervention types, drugs, and so on. So let's say we want to explore procedures for breast cancer. We can select these filters, and the dashboard will recalculate the graphs it needs to. In other words, as I drill down into the trials, I get a continuously updated view across my key data points. No data warehouse is needed for this. It's all supported by the features of the search engine. So in just 3 clicks, I've gone from 250,000 trials down to just about 100. Where this gets more interesting is when we combine the power of that engine with the filters we've defined, diverging from traditional dashboards that typically don't allow users to get deeper into the information beyond a set of predefined questions. Now let's look further at the trials that are currently open and recruiting. We've now gone beyond the dashboard to get a more granular view of the information that makes up the trials to further filter them and get closer to the facts we're after. Now, in an application like this, which is clearly constructed for a highly specialized user, we can afford a bit more complexity than we would get away with elsewhere. So as a result, we can offer quite a few controls and details on each trial. Note, for example, that in this application, each facet might contain thousands of entries. So it's handy to be able to accurately search within them. For example, the trial of this kind that Amgen is sponsoring. In this case, that's a real needle in the haystack. And recall that the question we are now implicitly asking is trials of treatment procedures for breast cancer sponsored by Amgen, which are currently recruiting applicants. That's not a query that we determine beforehand, but rather encourage the user to interact with the data in a more flexible and intuitive way. Clicking on the trial will give me a Fusion-created 360-degree view of the trial alongside the overview. Lucidworks Fusion is proactively searching for and returning valuable insights for me. For example, which drugs are involved are commonly trialed alongside others or commonly associated conditions. This panel shows me commonalities across the data. I didn't ask for this information explicitly, but it is of value to me, and I can initiate a new search from here with this trial as a basis, or explore some of the other related insights. It doesn't end here. Fusion can facilitate a very natural journey of discovery, allowing me to navigate between the related topic pages directly from this one. And that's what these small icons represent, a way to explore other trials, conditions, drugs, and sponsors. So let's take a look at the company behind this trial. So here's a completely dynamic view of Amgen as constructed by Fusion. From what is inherently a flat list of clinical trials, it shows us that they've conducted about 1,000 studies, which we can filter by date and so on. It surfaces other companies with similar interests and tells us that based on the studies, they're particularly focused on anemia, breast cancers, and something called multiple myeloma. So again, true to form, here's everything Fusion can extrapolate from the set about plasma cell myeloma. The image is automatically selected from Wikipedia on the fly, as is the condition summary at the top. And we can see from here that the most trialed product for this condition is called dexamethasone. And again, we can jump to that as a lens. So none of these entities exist in the index. They're different Fusion-constructed lenses on that single flat list of trials, computed by Fusion while bringing in supplemental information from trusted sources. So in stark contrast to more typical dashboard applications backed by data warehouses and lakes, Fusion can not only provide a highly tailored app experience for a particular audience, minimize training and cognitive load, but it can also facilitate a powerful journey of discovery, a journey of discovery with seamless transition between the aggregate at 40,000-foot view through progressively more detailed automatically extracted facts with filtering down to the individual objects and facts of interest, and back up again. And that completes the demo, so I'll turn it back over to Andy.
Thanks, John. We'll take questions in just a moment. In the event we don't have time to answer your question, someone will get back to you after the presentation. While we wait for questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk to you about Lucidworks and our flagship product, Lucidworks Fusion. Lucidworks is a San Francisco-based company with customers, employees, and offices around the world. We sell a product called Fusion. Fusion is an AI-powered search solution designed for Fortune 1000 companies. Lucidworks Fusion is a complete platform for ingesting data from any source and providing solutions that allow users to make use of that data. In today's data-intensive environment, oftentimes ingesting data requires matching it up with other data or grouping or classifying that data. Fusion provides a pre-built artificial intelligence functionality to make that a matter of drag, drop, and configure. Today, we looked at an example of a search and discovery application. In today's pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry, finding and analyzing the most relevant data often requires tools like machine learning. Beyond the artificial intelligence and data processing and user interface technologies, Fusion provides operations with a way to monitor, manage, and scale data globally. This includes providing fault tolerance and cross-globe replication functionality. To learn more, please check out our executive briefing paper, Connecting the Dots, Building Data Applications for Life-Saving Research. You can also play with the demo we looked at today by yourself at clinicaltrials.lucidworks.com. Finally, please check out our recording of the previous webinar of a Fusion 4 overview. Now let's start the Q&A. Thank you for your questions. We'll start with the first question for John. You just mentioned ingesting data in order to analyze it. Is ingesting data required to use your product, or can it analyze live data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we saw in the demo was a combination of the clinical trials, which we'd index into the search platform, and then pulling in information from, in this case, live from Wikipedia. What we have within Fusion is quite a broad set of capabilities that you can easily kind of configure together. So, for example, if you have a database somewhere that's updating rapidly, or another trusted authoritative source that you want to pull in information to within your application, alongside the data you've indexed, you can absolutely do that. And that's through the application building framework and also through the capabilities of the core platform, so being able to connect to many different types of data sets, as well as kind of federate those searches.
All right, another question. How does this compare to the data lake approach in Hadoop?
It's hard to compare two things that are quite different. I think if you think about it in terms of sort of outcomes, Hadoop is great in many ways, and there are good reasons that's been widely adopted. I think it's great for doing complex analytics at scale. The challenge that I think people have had with getting value out is often just the kinds of questions that you can ask, right? So you build your analytics infrastructure, but then you find you actually have to employ data scientists who need to be able to translate the questions the business have into kind of real analytics type queries, as it were, and then find a way to go and get the answer back. What we find with Fusion is allowing the index itself to be more flexible, more search driven, means that you aren't being so prescriptive in terms of the questions you can ask. So we focus a lot not just on how do you get data in a usable way, and we can connect to HDFS and other kind of Hadoop providers, but also how do you then turn that into valuable responses to the users and make it so that they can interrogate in any sort of way that makes sense to them, right? So I think that's where the main sort of difference lies, is our focus is very much on usability, as well as being able to build these different types of applications on top of that data.
All right. So the next question is, beyond clinical trials, what other types of biotech use cases can your solution be used for?
Well, I mean, that's something we'd be delighted to explore with anyone who comes to us. I think there are lots of different ways that this kind of platform can be used. The things that I've seen done, which are really sort of fascinating to me, are combining not just the unstructured information. You know, you've got clinicaltrials.gov here, but also in certain cases you've got internal trials that are being run by different organizations. You've got research papers. You've got internal IP and all of that unstructured information that you want to be able to kind of either impose some structure on through, through processing it through the platform, or just be able to search it. But then you've got highly structured information like, what they call sort of electronic lab notes, right? So this is, people taking notes right in the lab on electronic devices. All of that can go back in, but it can go back in alongside things like, calibration information. So how is the lab actually being set up? What is the output of the experiments that are being run? And that much more structured information can also be tracked alongside. So, the use cases can be quite broad in terms of, there are different questions along the product lifecycle, and it's really critical to be always being able to get the right data answer, is this a route that we want to go down with this particular target or this particular compound, right? And so, once you get further down that route, you then also have to ask yourself, what's the right way to market this, right? So you've got lots of different stakeholders that can use this data in different ways. And it's really powerful to be able to kind of pull it together, I think. So that's just kind of a few of the things that I've seen in the field, different types of data that people have pulled together, and to service really stakeholders across the kind of drug product life cycle.
All right, outstanding. Thank you everyone for attending. Forward to seeing you next time.